making it the West. And we mean Western Christendom. We're talking not the East, an Eastern Church, centered in Constantinople. We're talking about Rome and the Western European lands, from Germany, Switzerland, over to Gaul, Spain, that is France, into England, those areas that we think of Western Europe, Western Christendom, and that medieval usage of understanding. The papal reform by Pope Gregory, where the Catholic Church's lands and those who were members of the clergy of the church, things were codified, and the church became much more organized as a church-based organization, and kings and local rulers were separated in a sense from church rule. And therefore, it opened up where there was a secular governance in Europe. And Pope Gregory, who we're known for the Gregorian calendar, he was the Pope who initiated this. It was his papal decree, he wrote it himself, which initiated this. That was the first major reform that was putting the West towards what we have today. And the idea of serfdom, where there was where people served as vessels towards a king or a prince, and there was that economic relationship there, that really took off with this reform in the early 11th century by Pope Gregory. The next major one was Martin Luther, a Catholic priest, who puts his thesis on the door of the church in Wittenberg in Bavaria, and his protest against what he felt were the corruptions of the Catholic Church. But what really was more than that, a re-examination of what he was taught, an idea of salvation, where he really articulated a stance of salvation by grace, not by any act of works, which became normative Protestant theology. Therefore, the protest movement, a Protestant is a protester against the Catholic Church, so he was a protester, a Protestant. That was the next major reform. That was a serious reform, by the way, because it really changed not only people's understanding of God interacting, it changed how they interact with God and how they can interact with God. There was no longer a need of this intercessory role, but every person was placed one-on-one facing God. But it was also a violent period. This reform period under the Reformation was very violent. And it's quite interesting, which I bring up as a historical fact, when you go to Ohio and to Pennsylvania and you meet the Amish, for example, and the Amish are a group of, they're called the Anabaptists. What does that mean? Well, obviously, when you were a Catholic, what were you? As a baby, you were baptized, right? Well, Martin Luther and really Calvin, who was a contemporary, just when old Calvin was alive, were teaching, especially Calvin taught, that people needed to they had to be rebaptized because they had to make a choice to be baptized. And so they were the Anabaptists. They rejected the baptism of the Catholic Church, and they were rebaptized as adults. You could not be baptized as a child. You had to choose baptism. That's what they call the Anabaptists. Now, what happened in the 1520s and 1530s and 1540s, particularly in Germany, is you had these enclaves of Protestants coming up. And now the scripture, because Martin Luther translated the Bible into German, and that was an important move. It put the sacred text in the hands of the common people. And communities began to translate this text, began to interpret the Bible on their own. And they began then to try to apply biblical teachings as city-states. And you have a period there, particularly in the 1830s, in the 1530s, in the 1540s, where you had city-states that basically went amok as they tried to force people to read the text or to apply the text literally. So some cities, for example, they took a biblical principle that wealth should be shared in the church among the body of Christ. Therefore, many of these cities were mostly walled, these medieval cities. So basically, in some of these cities, the community of new Protestants trying to implement this biblical teaching, abolished all property. All property became communal. It was a type of communism. And there's a really, if you ever, maybe I'll frankly, I'll share, I'll put it up for you guys to listen to. Just, if you ever listen to BBC Radio 4, there is a program called In Our Time. There are 45-minute discussions, topical discussions on philosophy, religion, science, culture. They've been on over a decade. They're really great. And there was one there on one of these cities. I'm trying to think of the name. If it was, it might be the city of Münster. I think it is Münster, because I remember I visited Neumünster when I was in Germany as an exchange student. I remember I was thinking that thing. I think Münster is the example I'm thinking. The city of Münster, from like 1531. The reason I'm telling you this is important. Don't think I'm just rambling. Okay, because I'm not. It's a sign of what you do when you step out of authority. And you, as a faith community, trying to interpret Scripture without authority. What can go wrong? Like a group of American Muslims in New Jersey who don't know Arabic, they're converts, and they're reading Yusuf Ali to try to understand how to pray. Because they'll say, well, those things, we don't need a madhab, for example. We don't have to follow scholars, for example. Personal interpretation. Islam has a Protestant movement today, by the way. And when the Prophet said, you shall follow them, Yani ya Rasul, you mean Ahl Kitab, Nasraniyun or Yahud, the Christian youth, Evet. No. Those, Evet's Turkish. Shibran by shibran, handspan by handspan. We will follow them. Historically, we'll follow them. Just as they had a Protestant movement, we have a Protestant movement today in Islam. People who reject madhabs, legal authority, interpretation. And I take a very hard stand on that, because you're just following what they did, Martin Luther started some protest movement. We have the same thing today. So, but it also results in oppression as you try to interpret. So in Münster, for example, they abolished all of the property. Everyone was owning property. There was no property rights. Everyone was shared. And the city had a lockdown. And it became so oppressive that the Catholic princedoms or other city-states actually fought Münster. And it was a period from I think it was 1531 to 1534. And basically, these anti-Baptists trying to implement biblical teachings basically went amok, and it became a massacre. Thousands of people died. They starved to death, men, women, and children. And it was just a fiasco. From those people who started that in Münster, another movement started, Anti-Baptists. And their grandchildren are what you to know today as Amish. How could they go from being zealot, oppressive people who end up murdering each other to become a pacifist Christian group? We know them today. Because they learned from that experience. After that period in the 1530s, many of the Anti-Baptists took a stand. They saw their mistakes, and they took a commitment towards nonviolence. And they moved from that. But the first Anti-Baptist was a very violent movement, like the Taliban, where a woman could be stoned for showing too much white sock, or or something like that, or women weren't allowed to study. That type of oppression, which none of us would agree with, if you want to take it, was happening in Europe in the 1500s. Out of the movement of Martin Luther just to step out of a protest movement against indulgences and wrong practices he felt of the church. He probably never intended it to go that way, but this is what happens when you give it to common people without proper guidance. Things run amok. Especially issues of faith can run amok. Can really run amok. Because faith can be so powerful for people, like Newt Gingrich said. If you're a secular person, how can you truly understand a person of faith and their convictions? And so on the BBC program, I'll put it up here. You can go and listen to this beautiful, this interesting historical discussion. What happened in this city because of the earliest movement of the Protestants, which they were very aggressive and very brutal towards one another. as they tried to interpret Scripture on their own. The Reform of the 16th century, the Protestant Reformation, initiated many things in thought. And if you want to read more about that, and especially how this Reform movement, as a theological approach, affected issues of the development of a secular mindset in Western Europe. You can read a book by Alistair McGrath on what's in the book that he wrote on the twilight of atheism, where he talks about how the Protestant movement also initiated a movement towards a rise of atheism in Western Europe. How could a Christian movement do that? It was a very simple thing. It took popular religion, as people experienced it through the Catholic tradition of the large churches, stained glass windows, statues, all that the glitz that came with the Catholic tradition. And bam, you broke all of those statues, you took down all the churches. If you go today to Bern or Geneva in Switzerland, and you see some of the early surviving Calvinist churches, imagine the Pilgrim Fathers in America. What color were they wearing? All wearing white, all wearing black. Think of the Puritan movement in England, that period where the Puritans ruled, and think where things were very restricted. So one thing that went out of the popular thing of the mindset, and you see it with what happened after Henry VIII broke from the Catholic Church and the Protestant movement in England, and then the confiscation of Catholic churches and monasteries, where the wealth was taken in by the wealthy, the nobles of England. But churches were destroyed, and what replaced them all were these very sterile churches. You go today to Geneva or Bern in Switzerland, and you see churches that survived from the 1500s, these early Protestant churches, and they're just like this room right here. There's no picture of Jesus. There's just windows and pews and whitewash and a pulpit. Because all the religion was reduced down. That's all idolatry. Those are idols. Get rid of that. Get rid of all that shirky stuff and strip it all down. And that disjoint from the normal expression. For example, imagine praying in a mosque where there are no windows, just a wall and a mihrab. You walk into the mosque. At the mosque in Tucson, Arizona. It's just a mosque. And there's more life at the bank than at the mosque. There's more life. At least there are windows at the bank. The mosque is like totally no windows. You walk in, you feel like you're in a cubicle. Or now imagine going into another mosque which has calligraphy on it. Think of Al-Aqsa. Beautiful Dome of the Rock. People express themselves and their religious beliefs through art. That's normal. But for the early Puritans, the early Protestants, you got rid of it all. You were protesting anything Catholic. And so that, when you took away the intangible things that connect you with the intangible, God becomes just Word, the Bible being read, and there are no connectivity there through art and architecture. It's all sterilized. That affects people psychologically. And so people gradually, according to Alistair McGrath's research, and he's one of the most prominent theologians alive today in the Christian tradition, and he was once an atheist at Oxford, and now he's a theologian. And his analysis of how this movement of desensitizing and removing things from the popular mindset and practice of people resulted in a rise in atheism, because the connecting points that people would have in normal religious expression became reduced to just the Word of God and its abstraction. It's like if you only express God by His irada, His will, and you only think of God as He wills me to do this, He commands me to do it, that's what I got to do, then that's what you'll understand your religion. If you forget the concept of Jamal, beauty, for example, and all you have is Jalal, is harshness, and that's how you see God, well, what do you think you're going to get from that? Do you ever see, when the Prophet makes dhikr, Ya Rahman, Ya Arham Rahimeen, but you never see the Prophet or any of the car that come to us where there's an emphasis on Ya Jabbar, Ya Jabbar, Ya Jabbar, Ya Jabbar, oh you powerful destroyer. We don't do dhikr like that. We understand Jabbar, but we don't evoke that name a lot. We might hear Ya Halim, Ya Manan. It's how you invoke God, it's how you understand God, for example. So today we have similar people who want Islam like that, to strip down Islam. Take away anything else. That's innovation, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. You can only have it like this, and of course, there was a difference between when I studied those books in the madrasa in Turkey, when I saw them being studied in Pakistan, and then what some of those students, maybe, who were studying those same books in Pakistan, when they got picked up with an ideological Islam, a product of the 20th century, mixed with that, well, you get something else. You get something else. We have it in America today, and it's very sad. So, we have to understand then that we are also, I think, also in a reform period. We have a reformist thought in our tradition. And I pray that its negative effects will be reduced, just as I pray that a lot of things which could be negative to religion might be reduced. But Reformation, important period. Then, of course, the 18th century with the American Revolution and the French Revolution were very important. The document of the U.S. Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the U.S. Constitution are important documents in the history of legal writings in world history. No doubt about that. And in a sense, they become, part and parcel of a tradition after them of trying to mimic them and to copy that tradition for all that it's worth. That was an important period for us. I'll touch a little more about that, about this idea of constitutionalism. And of course, the 20th century with the Russian Revolution. Maybe with the United States and the French Revolution was the dethroning of that pyramidal approach towards government with the sovereign king, and then democratizing and making more egalitarian the distribution of power to the common person. And of course, it had its problems too. The French Revolution was not necessarily just a change of mind. It was a physically turbulent period, just as ours was. Our European ancestors, if you're of European descent, who came here and did what they did on the continent, that was also a period of turbulence to bring it forth. But these are important. Of course, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, was more of I understand of economic issues there. The economics that are important about social and the inequalities that were present economically and how wealth distribution had issues. And of course, then when we think about us as being a Western person, perhaps, or an activist, we think about social reform, economic reform, political reform, democratization. These things are in the air. How we want to make things better, our lifestyle for as many people as we can, and give people their liberty, their freedom, which they want. Which, if you're a person who approaches things with natural religion, natural law, that God has, we find the truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That's a statement of natural law, as opposed to positivist law, where God has inherently given us these rights. I think as Muslims we definitely fall into the rubric of natural law people. We believe that God has, لَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, we have indeed honored the sons and daughters of Adam. We understand that God has created us a certain way. There's a lot of evidence in the Quran and tradition that would support that kind of a view of man being given qualities and self-understanding of what it means to be things we might call natural virtue, and things which arise that way. But these things are important, and I would encourage you to have more curiosity. If you're ever going to have a dialogue about defining Sharia, you need to spend some time reading history, the history of the Western civilization, because you're talking to people. They may just be a person who works at a gas station, might be the cash. You never have a deep conversation, but you have to understand that each person out there, us in this room, we are products of these events. Whether you're that because you are Northern European, as I am, ethnically, or whether you are a person who has immigrated and grown up in a land where that is where you are now enculturated, and your mind has been set in those understandings. Okay? This is not a racial thing, it's just a thing. And of course, this is something which is being exported and exported, if I want to use that word, it's global now, these ideas. And you may not be in Malaysia or Indonesia or in Gambia or whatever country you're in, you may not have a direct relationship to Western European history, but you're definitely being influenced by the product of Western European history, whether you like it or not. Even contemporary Islamic movements are too. They are too. And so, to think that we are immune or somehow outside it in some way, you're living in utopia, you're living in, someplace else, a different universe. I don't know what universe you came from, but you are, as far as I'm concerned. And I think a lot of people say you are. Okay, so what are some aspects then that Harold Berman, he died, I think, in 2000, he died recently, in the last 15 years, I think, if I remember if I'm right about that, if I remember. He is one of the most foremost law theorists and historians that we've had produced in the United States from Harvard. And he talked about, in one of his writings, this idea of things that fundamental characteristics of the West. So one, a relatively sharp distinction between legal institutions and other types of institutions, religious, moral, political. Separation of church and state, for example. Think of that. A set of legal institutions administered by a special class of legal professionals, lawyers, themselves trained in a body of legal doctrine which had been systematized into a particular legal science or jurisprudence. So the idea of a systematized set of legal ordinances, it's systematic. It's canonized, it's codified. And then you have people who are specialized in reading it, articulating it, interpreting it, and making it accessible to the average person. They become your advocate in relationship to that law. A conception of law as a body of doctrine that develops and evolves over the course of centuries. This is important about Western law. It's something which evolves and develops. It's very organic. It can shift. And you can see right there, on one level, with the discourse with the Muslim, there might be a problem there. Okay? Might be a problem there. Because we are standing from the platform of what? That God has spoken. And of course, this is what the Pope has said, and others, especially when you talk about Christian theologians who want to discuss with Muslims about the Quran, and they would see as Christian theologians as problematic with the Muslim is that you have a fixed text. You have a text that is fixed and crystallized from the year 632 AD, and you're constantly having to refer back to 632 AD. And that can be problematic, they believe. Because, for the Muslim, it's not a problem. The Muslim, no, it's not a problem for me. Why? Because I always have that referent point back to God. So the Muslim might argue a case, it's not necessarily problematic. Okay? For us, there is a great virtue for us having that crystalline text. We'll always have the interpretive problem, but at least we have the text. So maybe from that perspective, one might say there might be a problem there. According to an inbuilt capacity for organic change shaped both by an inner logic and a felt need to adapt to new circumstances and expectations. We can talk more about that. I'm sure I'll bring these concepts up as I go through today. A conception of a law as both constitutional and constitutive in nature, supreme over the various governing authorities, church, state, civil society, making both necessary and possible the existence of a plurality of coexisting jurisdictions, initially of an ecclesiastical, royal, feudal, manorial, urban, and mercantile kind, which both compete and cooperate with each other in the context of an overarching legal order. So the idea then that you have the idea that the West is, you may have an overriding law. No man is supposed to be above that law, technically. Of course, if you're talking about a feudal system, that would have been the case. But it developed where everyone is subject to the law. And within that system, there are aspects of the law that are compartmentalized, just as society, in a sense, is compartmentalized. And that's also, that Western tradition of compartmentalization and reductionism is very part and parcel of a Western tradition on many levels. We see nature that way, reductionist. Our sciences, whether it's biology or organic chemistry, everything that we involve with today is very reductionist. And that's part and parcel. Another discussion there on modernity is this reductionist approach towards things. I'm not quite sure that it's an Islamic approach towards things, as quote unquote, quote unquote Islamic, use that liberally. But reductionism, compartmentalization is very Western. And you really see it particularly in our material sciences, that's the case. So if there is on levels of incongruence, we have this nice statement here, this modus vivendi, agreeing to disagree. We may all agree, you may have your secular humanists across there on the table over there, and you have your Sharia compliant Muslim over here. We may not agree, but we may be able to live together. Of course, there's a voice there, especially if you're on the right today, whether you're in France or whether you are in Holland or you're in England or you're in the United States. If you're on the right, in the sense of being a conservative, and whatever that may be in your context, is that living with the other is not always the most comfortable thing. Okay. And of course, we have Muslims who don't always want to live with the other. And even, on basic level, I'll give you an example of the mosques here in town, man. I don't understand these things. Some of you know, for example, it's like, I was at a local mosque, I won't tell you which mosque it is. The fire alarm was off in Jummah, and that mosque has a school attached to it. And they have fire codes in that mosque, they have alarms, and the Jummah prayer continued. And there were children from the Muslim school in the mosque, and no one was evacuated. The law says you have to evacuate. The mosque can't function without that system in place because you will not get permit to open. But when the president of that mosque stood up after Jummah, and a man from the congregation said, we were supposed to evacuate, the president of the mosque said, you should just shut up. I heard this. That, I don't understand. That man who was the president of the mosque was an immigrant. I don't mind if he brought me down on the plane. But he brought a mindset he should have left on the plane. You don't comply with city ordinances unless you're going to follow them up. You don't have a Muslim school unless you're willing to protect those children. And when the alarm goes off, you should take them out, even at Jummah. So I called the fire marshal, that man. Because that's what we're having. And it wasn't Masjid al-Nur, by the way. It was an ISGH mosque. I don't understand that. Because you betray your community, that's a mindset we don't need in this country. And we have a lot of it, where Muslims try to stick it to people. They don't know anything to stick it to people, just to make a buck. Because Muslims come to this country to make money. They didn't come in for dawah, they came in to make money. Whatever it takes. And Muslims selling pork, or selling alcohol, or selling pornography, or slot machines in your gas station. Whatever it is to make a buck. Because our ethics and morals are challenged. How many mosques have people who fund their mosques that way? And they get these fatwa. Like me getting a fatwa, a request for fatwa from some guy in New York. Since we're in Dar al-Har, can I go ahead and, I got a phone call. Since we're in Dar al-Har, can I go ahead and do the lottery since they're kuffar anyway? Oh yeah, I'm not making it up. I'm not making any of this up, by the way. I don't need to make it up. This is not like some weird TV show, believe it or not. This is what my being a Muslim convert in this religion, the things I have seen and lived with. And I'm still Muslim after all these years. As I always say, I see Muhammad Sallallahu, I don't see the congregation. Because I don't need to see the congregation, my brothers in Islam, on that level. Now these might be examples that aren't always there, but I've seen it in too many communities, simple things like that, which irk me, that go against my sensibilities. Just as a U.S. citizen, what I was raised with, what my mom taught me, and just what is legal, correct, and proper. They may be small things, but they're significant. They belie a mindset. And it's a lying mind, if you ask me. We as Muslims carry a great burden. And I've said this too many times. We are a bastion of God's divinity. We have beliefs, and we are a bastion of those beliefs. But at the same time, we are a bastion, and we must be advocates of right in all things, even against our own souls. This is the Quranic teaching. We must stand for these things: justice and equality, qist and adl. We have to. This is our virtue. Because God has spoken, we listen. Even against our own souls, we listen. And if we don't, then at the end of the day, we just end up selling it short. So, 12 o'clock. You all having food, by the way, coming in. It's from Shatna. I hope you like biryani. Because if you don't have biryani, if you don't like it, that's too bad. You'll have to have cupcakes or something else, like Costco. Now, and a lot of things I'm saying are theory, by the way. I can say we all talk about theory, like Newt Gingrich and people who sit in the ivory towers of universities and just chit chat the theory of it all. I was listening to a man yesterday on NPR who was involved as a journalist in war zones in the world. No, not a journalist. He was involved in United Nations on human rights abuses, and he was in Bosnia and Cambodia over the years. And the things he was describing, he said, this is what he said. When he was being asked in the interview, it's like, why do you do this? He said, when you are a man like me and you have seen these things yourself, how could I but not continue to work in these areas? And I thought that was amazing he said that. When you see these things yourself, when you see things are wrong, especially if you know things can be better than they are, and you just want to walk away, then what does it say about yourself? As Muslims, when we see things that go wrong, we have to be those people who stand up as representatives of Muhammad Sallallahu. It's not the boy holding the post at the beginning of the lecture that says, cut their heads off, those who insult Islam. That's not honoring Muhammad Sallallahu. That's throwing dirt in his face. That's not who we are. And so even this lecture today is me trying to be morally correct, I believe, as a Muslim in the community, to share some knowledge. I mean, if I'm reading all these books, I shouldn't just keep it to myself. I have to share it with people. You don't have to agree with me, but I might provoke you to go look it up. Because I tell you, I do a lot of reading and I poke myself a lot. I'm constantly poking myself. Because if I'm not, then I'm a dead Muslim. And my relationship with God is almost forfeit as far as I'm concerned. So, justice or qist and adl are very important for us. Why am I bringing this up? Because these things, this idea is very foundational. No, Gingrich is saying that Islam principally is at odds with the West, in the Western tradition. Well, is it? Are we principally, fundamentally, the core of our being, antithetical to Western ideas of justice and equity, of individual rights, etc., liberty, all those things which we make known that they define us as Western people. So in the Quran, we have this, Inna Allah ya'muru bil 'adli. You hear this. This is probably one of the most important verses. And you always hear this as the Imam generally is getting ready to come off the minbar. He quotes this. Inna Allah ya'muru bil 'adli wal ihsani wa ita'i dhil qurba. 3 principles there. God commands to adl, ihsan, and ita'i dhil qurba. God commands to adl. What's i'tidal mean? Linguistically, adala means to be in balance. So a good way from a spiritual tradition is called i'tidal qalb. The idea of i'tidal qalb, the idea of balance of the physical body, bringing balance to the physical body. So Ibn Qayyim Jawziyah, when he talks about Tib al-Nabi, Allah, and he's talking about, for example, he uses this very classical approach of the elementals and of the humors. He talks about, bringing cold, hot and cold in balance, or moist and dry in balance. He uses a very classical Unani Greek language that was very common and that pre-modern medical terminologies that Ibn Sina particularly wrote about, and others who were people who, in our tradition of growing out of and taking from a Greek medical tradition, at the same time incorporating in that a larger Tibbiyat approach with prophetic teachings about health and well-being. So the idea of i'tidal, of bringing yourself in a state of balance. So i'tidal, the balance of the physical frame, is this idea. The idea of something being balanced as it is. So you're not skewed off, excessive in one way or another. So Allah is al-adl. It's one of the divine names. So your concept of i'tidal is the idea that you are also embodying yourself a relationship with Allah as al-adl. And of course, a well-known hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is that of the 7 people under the shade of the throne of Allah, Yawm al-Qiyamah, the first is Imam al-Adl, the equitable, just, balanced leader. This is the high point of a Muslim. A Muslim to be in a role of leadership, of the imamate, of a Muslim, a leadership role where you are a person who is equitable and balanced in your perspective, in your personal life and you're dealing with other people. This is the ideal. And so whenever you look at that hadith, I encourage you to, or especially to a good commentary of that hadith of the 7 people in the throne, under the throne of Allah, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, is that you'll find that number 1 is Imam Adl, and I mention this to my students who come to my classes. Usually they've had me talk about this, that the other 6 are all ways to get to the first. And you should be very curious about that hadith. It's a beautiful teaching. We all have a leadership role to play in our lives. But to be the proper leader, you have to have the idea of i'tidal manifested. You must become a balanced human being on many fronts. So, ihsan, of course, ihsan, wow, big concept, but that's everything engaged with you in making things right, but making things right as you see God. As if you see God, you want that in your life. You're balanced, you have i'tidal, but you also have excellence in all things. And so what is that? You do things according as if you see God. And if you don't see him, he sees you. You see, you know he sees you. So you either are in a state of deep awareness of God, or you're in a state of parallel, or with that you are aware that God is deeply aware of you. That's ihsan, but it's a broad meaning there. And the idea then of giving a proper relation towards the qurba, people who are close to you. The idea of sila raham, the idea of making sure that family relationships are maintaining proper relationships with people. God commands us to this, and then what does God command us not to have, right? He forgives what? God forbids us what? Fahsha, impropriety, coarseness, oftentimes associated with sexual infidelity. It's fahsha, it's a common language in the Quran to understand that. That which is unbecoming and gross. Fuhush. Munkar. What's that? Things which you don't like. Munkar doesn't have to be necessarily legally defined for you, like ma'ruf, for example. The concept of ma'ruf in the Quran is not necessarily, doesn't have necessarily be defined as ma'ruf. Ma'ruf, from the concept of urf, is the idea of what you can understand or even customarily people don't like. Almost naturally, you don't like it. Like, none of us wants to eat feces. You find eating feces disgusting. There's an inkar in yourself, in your natural state, to reject eating feces. So the ma'ruf in you don't need to be told by God and His Prophet, don't eat feces. Because that's ma'ruf. Okay? Now, if you're, a person who that's your thing, then you're really skewed off. I'm sorry, but that little bit from a Muslim, not very natural there. But hey, I'm sure you can find it on YouTube. Everything is there. Every perversion, corruption is there, and they're making bazillion dollars off of people's things, Seriously, man. Facebook is like, what now? How many billions of dollars? $11 billion, Facebook? Farm bill. When are we going to have Sharia bill? Imagine Sharia bill. I'm waiting to have that game like Mecca bill. And it's like you got to go on Hajj, or Hajj bill. You got to make Hajj. Highway bandits, thieves, ticket agents who try to make money off of you, and try to make a quick buck off you. I don't know. Mecca bill, Hajj bill. It's coming. I'm just waiting for the Kaaba to have the Starbucks sign there. And I know, hey, it's all come full term. Won't surprise me when it happens. I'm sure there'll be a fatwa for out there for it, It's not technically a plane, because we don't have to cut through there, You can just go around the bench there and pick up your cappuccinos, you go around, you drink and talk as you make tawaf, It's weird about that. So you can have a barista right there, a little Starbucks sign, pushing for your face veil, and you go around getting your drinks, It'll happen. Give it time. If you can't respect the Kaaba, think of the Ottomans. In Mecca, when the Ottomans were there, they didn't have any of the structures around the mosque taller than the Kaaba, except the minarets, because you had to project forth. But today, a clock! You can put the Kaaba in the clock! Because people don't respect the sacred things of God. We respect the dunya marketing of man. Mindsets have changed. When I lived in Medina, I was thinking, people might complain about the Ottomans, especially if you're Armenian. But when I was living in Medina when they were doing the construction of the Prophet's Mosque. I saw a lot of little hills being blown up. Or, they were blowing up things and making history clean, a new history for the Muslim. Get rid of all that bid'ah, all those sacred spots. Who cares if Abu Bakr sat there once? He's dead. We don't need this. Muslims don't need that stuff. They don't need that stuff. So I was there, watching things being changed. I saw some of the original, the Ottoman walls of Medina before that last piece was destroyed. I remember you came out of the Masjid and it was like you walk there and it's there, and people used to go and pee there. I thought, it's like a public toilet, and they blew it up finally. It's gone. And I was thinking, that all the noise that was going on, all the noise in Medina at the time. I was thinking when the Ottomans, when we did the Masjid, how they muffled the hammers and muffled the horse's feet not to disturb the Prophet because he's alive in his grave. And how people today, Rasulullah, you hear that? You're dead anyway. Seriously, respect. Hurma, showing sacredness for something. Different time. It's like thinking of Abu Darda, when he came in from Jum'ah, and he comes to his wife, and Abu Darda, he's like, rolled on, he's like, he's like complaining to his wife, he's like, people come in and they're like, his wife's like, what's wrong? If Muhammad was alive, he would not recognize his religion except for the congregational prayer. And this was a Sahaba saying this. Of course, he was an extreme Sahaba when it came to asceticism and stuff like that. I grant you that. But for him to say something like that, Allah protect us. So, munkar, things that are not necessarily having to be legislated for you. A munkar is a broad term, just like ma'ruf is. It's the opposite, okay? Well, baghi, rebellion can be applied for legally, maybe towards highway robbers, for example. Or you intentionally seek to harm people physically or their wealth. Baghi, that type of rebellion. God commands us to three things and prohibits three things, and that is an important thing. Ya'idukum la'alakum tadhakkarun. God gives you a word. He speaks to you that you will think, you will reflect, you will know. Okay, this is important. And then, and these are two books by Ibn Qayyim Jawzi, two quotes from two of his books. God has sent His messengers. God has sent His messengers and revealed His books so that people may establish qist, upon which the heavens and the earth stand. And when the signs of justice appear in any manner, then that is the reflection of the Sharia and religion of God. And his I'lam, he said, the lawgiver has not, and why am I giving these quotes are very important, by the way, these two quotes. The lawgiver has not confined the way. This is Ibn Qayyim Jawzi. And I'm quoting this because other scholars have quoted this. Why are they quoting this to Ibn Qayyim Jawzi? Because Ibn Qayyim Jawzi, as a student of Ibn Taymiyyah, was, a humbly scholar. But for humbly to say something that's quite interesting, because it's laying out an interesting way of thought for us. The lawgiver has not confined the ways and means of attaining justice or any of its signs and indications, to the exclusion of other evidence. He declared justice as his overriding objective and also explained some of the means of attaining it, but then commanded that it should be the basis. Inna Allah ya'muru bil adl. Allah doesn't define here in this verse what adl is. You will find almost no clear restrictions to this concept of adl in the Quran. Because one thing about Muslims is we want to know the minutiae of everything. We think that many Muslims think that Sharia is to give us the minutiae of everything in life. Everything. How much foam is on your coffee? Is it 2 sugars or 3? God wants us to be that way. And obviously, anyone who has any sense that knows history knows that this is our history, sacred history. It's history of the way the Prophet and if his companions did that. It's not what God's about, by the way. In legislation. I'm not saying God's not that way when it comes to your relationship with God, but to get it legislated to those details, alhamdulillah, we're free from that. And we'll talk more about that. And so he says he declared justice as over. So the idea then that God primarily wants justice, equitableness, balance in things. You've all heard this hadith. Converts get it a lot. You're the convert. I was. Gung-ho. Nice day too. Bam. I go from Gary Edwards, freshman at Purdue, to Naim Abdul-Wali, convert, Muslim convert. It's 1983. I'm wearing a thobe now. I had Pakistani friends. I had shalwar kameez, and I wasn't wearing jeans anymore. I had a topi on my head, I had a turban on my head, and of course all my Muslim friends from overseas who are doing PhDs who don't care or stuff like that, they said, Adina Yusuf, brother, it's easy. Don't overburden yourself. Religion will overburden you. You gotta stop that. Calm down. Converts get it all the time. Take it easy. You don't need that swag, you can wear what you want. Some of you here, your parents are the same way. Your mom doesn't wear a hijab, you do. Honey, God will forgive you, It's like, it's not such a big thing, A little bit of hair. It's okay. It's alright. How my parents were that way, right? Don't take religion easy. Just pray. Okay? So you hear that, it's like Dino Yusur, and it's so easy in this country, you can't recognize it. Half the time what Islam is, it's so easy. So easy. I'm not saying it's not there. Yusur is so important, but be careful how you understand Yusur, because Yusur can lead you to be a loser in your life. But we have to be mindful that how we do things and how we understand things is so, at times, critical of how we're, at the end result of what we get in our lives and how people perceive us. I mean, well, I won't talk about what people perceive me. So let's talk then about justice in the Quran. So so New Green is saying, well, Islam is principally it's so bad, Fundamentally, Islam is a problem. Fundamentally, in its principles, it's usul, not its furu', its branches, in its roots. It's problematic. Okay, and we hear this from people. It's a problematic religion. Some people take it so problematic, Allah isn't God anymore. He's the moon god. So they take it to that extreme. That it's so fundamentally problematic. So let's then look at this. Okay, in the Quran, it's break time. Is it break time? Yeah? Should we take a break? Should I keep talking, rambling? Keep rambling? Okay. So let's then talk about some areas of justice, qist, and adl that we are to understand for us as Muslims, to contextualize it. This is what the Sharia is about. So we're talking about Sharia, by the way, this whole time, except for my caveats there. This is Sharia. Allah Ta'ala mentions here, so this is one about issues of children, right? Your adopted children. In khiftum alla tuqsitu. There's the word qasata, qist. The verb there, right? If you fear, right? Allah tuqsit, that you will not have tuqsitu, have qist. Fi yatama, towards the orphans, and then the verse continues. So in this verse, as you can read through it, and of course, I'm not having a discussion here about multiple wives and all that. Please don't get me down that path. Okay? I don't want to discuss those things. Sorry. Maybe one day we'll have that discussion because that text is over there. I don't want to go over there right now. Because I'm sure I've said things over today that if you want to pull me over and look outside in the hallway, I'll get me going on it. I'm sure that's what it is, okay? But in Surah Ahzab, verse number 5, call them لآبائهم هو أقسط عند الله. The idea of referring to your children who are adopted by their own names. You acknowledge their lineage, you acknowledge their parentage, for example, is important. But the idea here, the reason I'm pointing this is that these are phrases in the Quran where the verb qasata is used. So we understand that God wants us to have equitableness in this issue, which we can lay out principles in and start understanding that we must have balanced interactions, equitableness, and rightness when it comes to these relationships with, for example, the orphans, people who are adopted. So keep that in mind. That's the reason I'm putting that there, these verses. Matrimonial relations. Oh, this is a big one. In khiftum, there it is. Allah goes to fankihu ma taba lakum. So here in this verse then is that qist then is also associated with marriage. Of course, it's the same ayat as before. But the idea, as scholars have looked at this verse also talks about having فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا فَوَاحِدًا. If you can't have equivalence, then one. That should be every man who's ever thinking about the second wife, which I don't advocate at all. I don't believe that I believe it's permissible, but I don't believe that it's something you can, that we should be like, I see it on some chat groups and people talking about it. Like guys, like unmarried guys in university, that's all they talk about. Basketball and this. Like basketball and this. Which one comes first? Muslim guys talking about jariyah. Why would you be talking about 2012? You're talking about slave girls. Where do you come from? It's like, well, where do you live at? I mean, it's like, are you too much World of Warcraft in your life? I don't know. Or what have you been playing? I don't know. But seriously, it's like, it's illegal. First of all, I thought we got rid of all that slavery stuff. But hey, but it's like really, it's like these guys get married and get their lives together. But in this verse, the idea of equitableness in your relationships with your wives, and of course, we can have that discussion on both sides of the ring, on which finger it's on, both men and women. But I was giving it cause these verses not to have deep discussions, but this is where we understand these verbs are being used in the Quran and trying to help us understand that equitableness equity and balance are necessary in relationships. Okay? And Surah Al-Hujurat, where إن طائفتان من المؤمنين اقتتلوا فاصلحوا بينهما. If you keep reading this, then right, it says so in I can't read very well, my eyes are really bad, right? إن بغت إحداهما على أخرى فقاتلوا التي تبغي حتى تفيء, right? إذا أمر إن فاءت فاصلحوا بينهما بالعدل وأقسطوا إن الله يحب المقسطين. Obviously, the idea, and this can be applied towards marriage, by the way. If two parties tie up a tan, husband and wife having problems, you sit down, you have islah, you try to bring sulh, you try to reconcile them, and you do it being equitable and balanced in it. But aslihu, they have islah, right? Bainahum, between the two, bi'adl, equitably, with rightness and balance. So this is a verse used by scholars. If you read texts on ahkam of marriage or tazweej, those issues, ahwal, often under books called ahwal shakhsiyya, human relationship books. We usually are classical fixed books about marriage, ahwal shakhsiyya. Usually the fiqh of marriage and all that, all the details you need to know about marriage and everything are usually under ahwal shakhsiyya texts. And so the idea here is that we have to have these relationships and marital relationships that are balanced and equitable on both sides of the fence. That's just there for reference for you. What about contraction? I didn't put Arabic. This is the longest verse in the Quran. The idea of equitableness in contract related to economic issues. One can then extract from that. So we talked about social issues, yatama, orphans, adopted children, marital relationships. Now, we want the issue of contracts in Surah Al-Baqarah. We didn't put it there because it's so long, the longest ayat in the Quran. So that's one that you can reference to, ayat number 282. Judicial matters, for example. There must be equity and justice and balance in that. I'm losing my voice. وَإِنْ حَكَمْتَ فَأَحْكُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ بِالْقِسْطِ. So when you pass judgment, judge them, between them equitably. And Allah says here also, as we got already the previous verse about reconciling between parties, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُقْسِطِينَ. Allah loves people who are people who apply themselves equitably in qist. So this idea of when you judge, and of course, when you read classical books on even the Majallah, I think here in the Majallah, you know, I was reading the English here. This is, for example, near the end of the book, it's not one book, that's a long book. That's why it didn't look right. In the Majallah, for example, about manners, section 2, the last section of the Majallah, is about the manners of a judge. The judge must abstain from all actions and deeds which will destroy the majesty of the court, like buying and selling and joking during the sitting of the court. So that he has waqar. The judge is to be a person who comes there. He's like, hey, I'm the judge, you know. Hey, it's not family. It's not, you know, Islamic courts is not. It's not like family courts like that. You know, popular courts. The judge must not accept a present from either of the two parties, for example. The judge must not go to a feast given by either of the litigating parties. You can't have, getting, because it's a conflict of interest. So the judge has to be neutral. It also goes through, I think it was a different section, but, and you also read in other fiqh books, the judge is not to be angry. He's not supposed to be hungry. He shouldn't be sick. All those issues how the judge has to be when he's passing judgment. Because all those are in conflict to the litigants, to their well-being. Because what is important is the judge is adjudicating between people. You know, not trying to put some money in his pocket or, hey. And so, for example, if the rich man is there and the poor man, the judge addresses each one the same way. He doesn't give all these honorific titles to the rich man and calls him, hey, Bob, or Mr. Smith. He has to speak equally to them, so that they would perceive themselves, even though one may be rich, one may be poor, one may be white, one may be black, one may be a Muslim, one may be a non-Muslim. At least you judge them, if you're judging them, that they're perceiving themselves and they are treated equally. And you read these in class, these type of conditions on the judge just to sit at his judgment seat are in our classical fiqh manuals. This is not like new stuff. But our scholars have thought about these things, because the idea of judgment or passing judgment is the worst thing any scholar would want to do. You know, in the early days of Islam, when we had empires and stuff like that, during the Umayyad period and the early Abbasid period, it's very well known that if you were a ruler and you wanted to hurt a scholar you didn't like, make him a judge. If he was a real scholar, you have hurt him so bad by making him a judge. Now, if he was a sycophant of the royal court, that's a different thing. He may want that. But if he was a real judge, he would have been fearful. Because he knows that this is a serious affair for him. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بِآيَاتِنَا سَوْفَ نُصْلِيهِمْ نَارًا كُلَّمَا نضجت جلودهم بدلناهم جلود غيرها ليذوق عذاب الله كان عليم حكيم. Why am I closing there?
You can't see the power screen.
What happened? What are you guys telling us? Did I hit a button?
You went to sleep.
Did I go to sleep? Do I have to hit something? I'm like technologically challenged right now. So I'm like frozen. Hit what? This one?
Yeah.
Come on. Clap on. Clap off. That didn't work. No. Mode? Which one is it? PC? Come on, Rice University students. You're paying lots of money to be here. I'm not good at this stuff.